Hold on. Is that Lex? It's Astrostetics. Let's get it, baby. Today, we're gonna get into Saturn going retrograde. Yes, you know the planet Saturn, the last planet that we can see with the naked eye? It's going retrograde in the sign of Pisces, the last sign of the zodiac. Saturn is going retrograde in that. So make sure you go to the description below this video and pick up a copy of Astrostetics, because this is where all the source is, alright? Now y'all, Saturn, we have the legendary planet Saturn, the sixth planet from the sun, the third planet from the earth, and the last planet once again that we could see with the naked eye. Guess what? This planet's going to be going retrograde tomorrow, June 29th, 2024, and Saturn will be retrograde until November. Now, this is important because Saturn has been going retrograde in the summertime. So, whatever you didn't take care of last year or last summer, Saturn governs long distance structure and organization. So, all of the short-term goals that you've been working on, they should build up to larger goals. And as we get into this, you'll see that every sign will experience this differently. Now, as we just said, Saturn has been going retrograde at the beginning of the summer for the last 3 to 4 years. As time goes on, Saturn will go retrograde deeper in the summertime. So what you'll notice is that during the summertime, they might roll some laws back, re-examine the legal, social structure. We'll notice a lot of things like that happen this summer. Now look, Saturn is going to be retrograde for about 4.5 months or 139 days. Before we get into Saturn retrograde, we have to understand, no planet actually goes retrograde. Retrogrades happen because all bodies are in constant motion, and at times the Earth catches up with the planet and zooms past it, and it looks as if the planet is going backwards because the Earth is moving past it. In Astrostetics, we refer to Saturn as the Grand Master. Saturn governs 3D reality, chronological order, authority, and even judges. While Saturn can govern aspects of time, Saturn is not the timekeeper. Saturn does share a massive relationship with time, but it doesn't keep it. It observes the passage of time. And this is why it sheds light on judgment. Now make sure y'all go to the description because we're about to go in on this. Now if you think about an hourglass that literally measures time, before they used to have water clocks and they would measure time with the passing of certain star groups. That's how they used to tell what time it was. All of the planets, the stars, can be considered a timekeeper. The sun and the moon are pretty much the prime timekeepers, prime time. And this is the reason why Saturn is mad with the sun and the moon. It's one of the reasons. All of the planets have their own dynamics and their ratios. And all of the planets share a relationship with time. Saturn just happens to orbit the sun the slowest out of all the planets. The only planets that orbit slower than Saturn is Uranus and Neptune. And if you want, you can add Pluto. We use the sun and the earth and the moon to primarily calculate the passage of time. Ancient cultures, they would use Jupiter and Saturn to create calendars, but thinking about that, Saturn doesn't necessarily deal with farming. Saturn is also in detriment in Cancer as well, alright? Now, Saturn retrograde is an important period to review law, business, government reform policies. During Saturn retrogrades, hard turns can be taken on established policies. Saturn is going retrograde at 19 degrees Pisces, and check this out. This is one of the best places for Saturn to go retrograde in Pisces. And the last total solar eclipse we had was at 19 degrees Aries, and this is a perfect semi-sextile. But Saturn retrograde can also deal with appeals and repeals. Definitely judges and judgment, and notice that Saturn has a reputation for being cold. But during the winter season, the Earth is closer to the sun, so it orbits on its own axis a bit slower. So all seasons times of the year can influence our perspective of time. And remember that Saturn rules the winter season, all right? Saturn is the planet that takes his time. And in Astrostetics, we akin Saturn to a strict, stringent school principal that walks around the hallway casting harsh judgment. Saturn also deals with responsibilities. The responsibility factor of Saturn is the most important aspect of Saturn because Saturn, once again, holds you accountable. And that's why it's exalted in Libra. Essentially, it's the highest authority in balance and justice. Therefore, when people call Saturn the timekeeper, we understand why they say that. But in the long run, Saturn is the accounter. It's going to hold you accountable. Astrostetics shows that Saturn rules the 10th house. In most sky charts, the midheaven and the 10th house are equivalent, but in equal house, the 10th house and the midheaven are in two different places. For the most part, the 10th house is where we calculate time from, and that's based on the sun's transit through the southern meridian. Once again, we calculate time from there, but we don't necessarily use Saturn for that. That's once again based on the sun's transit through that period of the sky. So Saturn is also said to govern an aspect of that space, but it does not keep time, it accounts for it. So out of all the planets, because Saturn moves the slowest, it observes the other planets at their slowest. And this is why it deals with observing and crystallizing. Saturn observes everything in its slowest state. So it doesn't make it a timekeeper, but the Grand Master at observing others. This is why it's exalted in Libra. So express yourself and make sure you like, share, and comment and subscribe. Now look, at the time of this recording, the Supreme Court is popping up in the news. Astrostetics shows us that Saturn also governs the judicial system. The last time Saturn went retrograde, it was in Aquarius. This time it's going retrograde in Pisces. Now, as Saturn goes retrograde in Pisces, it finishes its cycle once again because Pisces is the last sign. Saturn retrograde allows us to triple check and account for what we don't see. Especially when Saturn is in Pisces, this is like spiritual responsibilities. Pisces is the high seas and one of the signs of invisibility. Pisces is traditionally ruled by Jupiter, and now Neptune is the co-ruler. Express yourself, make sure you like, share, comment, and subscribe, because this video is amazing. Now, prior to finding Uranus and Neptune, Saturn was considered the limitation of our solar system because it was also considered the last sphere, and beyond it was the sphere of the fixed stars. In Astrostetics, Saturn governs discipline, regulation, restriction, marriages, limitations, mastery, father time, bone structure, organization, 3D reality, manifestation, karma, occupation, aspects of the midhaven, chronological order, authority, judgment, the judicial system. Saturn can represent Chronos as well, and once again judges. And all of the energies that we just mentioned may sound strict and authoritative, but they can also lead to mastery and finesse. These are reasons why Saturn is the Grand Master, and he will challenge you to become the ultimate version of yourself. In Astrostetics, Saturn governs status, the presidents, materialization, grounding, mastery, learning, density, gravity, challenges, growth, adulting, maturity, lessons, exams, tests, constructions, buildings, elders, compression, compaction, density, focus, and even management. Now remember, y'all, Saturn governs discipline, ultimately defining things and inevitable creation. Saturn will force us to manifest whether we know it or not. Saturn has no choice but to solidify. So it doesn't keep time, but it does account for choices and actions that we take, and also actions that we don't take. Everything has an impact on what we do and even what we don't do. And Saturn holds us responsible for that. And when it goes retrograde, it allows us to recalibrate. All right? Now remember, Saturn is the planet of constriction, restriction, regulation, and chronological arrangement. When Saturn is in Pisces, it cracks down on international relations and institutions. If you look at the political climate, it doesn't matter which candidate wins between Biden and Trump. Whoever wins, they'll still be cracking down on relations abroad, domestically, and overseas. Saturn can govern aspects of focus. What you focus on is what you actualize. Saturn will be retrograde for the entire summer. During next August, this August we'll see Saturn at its finest. When Venus is in Virgo, Saturn retrograde in Pisces will be maximized. Saturn retrogrades may be about 6.5 to 7 degrees. So every time Saturn goes retrograde, it'll go back about 7 degrees. This time it's going retrograde in the later aspects of Pisces, and these is governed by the Moon, Jupiter, and Mercury. And we want to rationalize this because this deals with multicultural commerce and domestic exchange between communities. When it comes to the migrant aspect, that's been popping off since Jupiter and Neptune was conjunct in 2022. But Jupiter was in Pisces that year. And now notice Saturn is in Pisces, Pisces being ruled by Jupiter. Pisces can also deal with movement across the waters and even local waters. And this involves law, arrangement, order, and even focus of people in the religious sense. So notice that Saturn retrograde can cover regulations around waters. And during the course of this transit, Jupiter and Saturn will square each other. And this can be beneficial. Jupiter and Mars will also be conjunct at some point this summer. And this is going to be one of the highlights of this summer. And this is another confirmation that there's going to be a media firestorm. Major massive events. So anybody that's in a media, communication, and data transmission, look out. Saturn going retrograde also highlights a lot of documentation again, right? And this can also lead to announcements concerning ancient artifacts. We been spoke about Saturn going into Pisces and how this can highlight religion. If you look at what's going on in the Middle East, abroad, overseas, there's a strong religious aspect tied to this Pisces. And Saturn retrograde, it benefits Virgo, Scorpio, Cancers, and Sagittarius, Capricorns, right? And all of these signs can deal with religious pursuits and expanding horizons and transformation. Saturn can deal with solidifying communities, and it highlights massive repeals in paperworks and groups. This is also about controlling community groups and establishing purpose in a sense. Saturn in Pisces highlights labor rights, and people will be focused on their spiritual beliefs attached to their labor. Saturn retrograde also highlights invisible threads in partnerships. This is a great time to renew how you want to explore your relationship dynamics. And Saturn in Pisces also benefits Virgos and some Leos. Now, Saturn retrograde, it also highlights us clamping down on emotionally and spiritually sensitive topics. Things like foreign policy and foreign laws in other lands can also come into the fray. If you look at certain religious groups and communities, Saturn in Pisces highlights authority in these fields. This highlights the authorities, presidential figures. Saturn governs the governors, all right? Remember that. Traditionally, Saturn is the last planet from the sun. So in a way, in Astrostetics, it is the last planet that we can see without the aid of a telescope or some observational device. It's the guardian. Saturn also has a hexagonal structure on its north pole. Hexagons are governed by 6, which can deal with karma and defining of the lower self. And Saturn is the 6th planet away from the sun. So once again, Astrostetics shows that all of the planets have a karmic aspect attached to them. But Saturn is meant to adjust, and in the greatest sense, Saturn forces inevitable change that is meant to upgrade and mold our higher purpose. It's exalted in Libra. Now, how do we do this? We have to grow, carve character, mold our passions, and properly align them with the passage of time. This is how you build authority. If you want to become good at something, great with something, you got to develop experience, and this is how you gain mastery and expertise. this sheds light also on why we call Capricorn the executives. Saturn in traditional astrology rules Capricorn and Aquarius. Saturn is the only planet that rules two signs consecutively, one after the other. Alright? So Saturn is the planet that is the most consistent with the space that it occupies. In Astrostetics, we stick with the traditional rulership because when you see why planets govern two signs, it'll blow your mind. Now, Saturn orbits the solar system in the slowest, but Saturn orbits on its own axis extremely fast. Saturn, in a way, is the planet with the most buoyancy. In Astrostetics, we want to know, why would one of the biggest planets have the most buoyancy? And Saturn deals with materialization and time management. Well, if you look at the other gas giants, Saturn rotates the slowest between Jupiter. So Saturn can deal with condensing the properties of space, and it's visible. Saturn can make things heavy, but it's the lightest planet, right? It has the most buoyancy in a way. So Saturn is a game changer, and it flips the game. This is why we call it the Grand Master. Saturn doesn't really have any variables of keeping time. That's the sun. And certain astronomical vibes, some people might say Saturn and the sun have beef. The sun can process light, meanwhile Saturn is at the edge of the solar system. The sixth planet away from the sun, the third planet from the earth. Therefore, it gets the light from the sun. So Saturn, unless it's taking its light from Jupiter, Saturn manages its own planet the most, independently of the sun. It's like Saturn is on its own, holding it down on the outskirts of the solar system, right? So Saturn might get the sun's light the least. And this is why in Astrostetics, we enjoy Saturn being exalted in Libra. All right, this is powerful. Now, Saturn retrograde brings in executive shifts, especially with that Jupiter square that'll come in the middle of August. And this can bring about some intimacy dynamics for families, major changes in agriculture, produce, national security announcements, changes in the family structure. You might even notice a lot of people readjusting their family dynamics, new family energy, right? And this can foster emotional balance and emotional transformation for a lot of people. So anybody out there, if you need to readjust any family matters, these transits can be beautiful for family dynamics, property, and even people in real estate. If you even look at Joe Biden and Trump, these are two authority figures. They debated the day before the Saturn retrograde, and remember, Jupiter in Gemini, Saturn in Pisces, this is a lucrative astrological alignment. Trump and Biden, they have Sagittarius going on, and that can get a massive boost in conjunction with Virgo. We're going to see some things around community group rights, reform rights, special industry groups. Some of these industry groups may be compelled to interact with the masses. So before Saturn leaves Pisces, we're going to be in the middle of the decade, right? Now Saturn, it'll go retrograde about back 7 degrees. So we've been in the shadow phase, then we're going to go into pre-shadow. We've been in the pre-shadow phase, then we're going to go into shadow phase, right? Saturn retrogrades also highlights us solidifying what's in the imagination. Pisces can rule cinema, quantum physics, the quantum field, the soul, the 12th house, intuition, imagination, motion pictures, sentimentalities, the unseen, invisibility, mysticalities, illusions, isolation, feelings, empathy, compassion, spirituality, psychedelics. The Pisces and Saturn in Pisces can deal with spiritual mastery, right? And this can propel people to clamp down on their own spiritual ideologies and what they value in their imagination. Saturn can also add pressure. Saturn is essentially the planet that's going to put pressure on you. Ultimately, Saturn will always bring about changes in the aspect of mastery. Saturn, while it's in Pisces, can highlight the entertainment industry and motion pictures, as we mentioned. This can also deal with dreams and what we imagine when we're replicating the same imaginable things, right? Pisces can also govern psychedelics and the soul. This can bring about new initiatives concerning substances, drugs, cracking down on drug substance abuse, right? And this can highlight busts in massive drug rings, right? Pisces can also deal with drugs. Saturn in Pisces, this is the authorities cracking down on drugs. We're going to see a massive shift in international law and the clarification around international laws and restrictions. And we might even see some more scandals dealing with figures, with public figures. And Saturn will be in retrograde around the time of the election. So this can show us some interesting events with world leaders and authoritative figures. And this can also show figures of authority coming together, especially around spiritual, religious matters as well. Saturn in Pisces, we could see a lot of adjustments in paperwork, a lot of religious groups, and condensing and really reforming a lot of laws. So this transit, y'all, is going to be a very beautiful one. Sagittariuses, the Capricorns, the Aquariuses, the Virgos. This is a great transit for y'all, and the Geminis as well. This transit is going to be beautiful for the Geminis for the rest of the year. But then going into next year, that Saturn in Pisces, it's going to have a more defining aspect. And yeah, in the next video, we're going to go into what each zodiac sign can expect from this transit. All right, I got y'all. But Saturn, being the sixth planet away from the sun, and in traditional astronomy, traditional astrology, it's the last planet away. The third planet from the Earth is also the sixth planet away from the sun. This is why if you look at some traditional astronomy, Saturn and Pluto might sound very similar. Saturn can deal with being cold, dark, emotionless. Saturn is the last planet away from the sun. It's not getting none of that heat. It might not be getting none of that light. But yet, Saturn is still able to restrict and give Jupiter responsibility, right? Because Saturn is at the edge of the solar system in traditional astronomy. Jupiter is in between Mars and Saturn. So Jupiter got Saturn next to it. Like, hey, Jupiter is about fun, right? How we celebrate, how we like to express love and our jovial nature, right? Saturn is like, okay, you could do all that, but I'm still on your ass. Being the ruler of Capricorn, this is the sign of business and Astrostetics. We look at Capricorn as the executive. Well, that means Saturn is also an executive as well. Saturn is the boss. And Saturn also can deal with the system. The system can deal with organizing, organizational structures, right? So it's important, y'all, that we understand these astronomical and astrological dynamics. In no way is Saturn the timekeeper. We literally use the sun and the moon, and really all of the planets, all of the bodies in the solar system can, in a way, create our perception of time. When people say that time can deal with Saturn, yeah, we use the 10th house or the southern meridian to calculate what time it is, but that's based on the sun, and it could be what constellation is in that part of the sky map. So the Saturn, in a way, what does Saturn have to do with time aside from mastery, experience, finesse, becoming an executive, becoming seasoned in your work? That's Saturnian values. This is why Saturn can deal with authority, because you put your work in, you have responsibility, and that comes with the passage of time. So when we look at what you're doing, what you're saying, and what you're thinking, Saturn is going to hold you accountable for that. So when you say something off, Saturn, we prove all the way Saturn is not the timekeeper, but Saturn is the principle of the zodiac. Saturn got a ruler out, and if you do something crazy, Saturn is right? If you do something crazy, Saturn is on your ass. Or Saturn might not even say nothing to you. Saturn can, especially when it's in Pisces, it's about the spiritual aspect. Pisces can also be silent, very private. Pisces is invisibility. It's one of the signs of invisibility. Between Cancer and Scorpio, Pisces is the most invisible. In the traditional aspect, Neptune is the modern ruler of Pisces. And you know that when you get to Uranus and Neptune, you cannot see those with the naked eye. Maybe if you're in like a remote desert and somewhere with no light pollution, you could probably deadass see Uranus, maybe. But Neptune, you're not see that. So Neptune being the ruler of Pisces in tandem with Jupiter, this is when the zodiac gets transcendental. But when Saturn is in here, Saturn is calling us to focus on our spiritual psychic awareness. And with this can lead to a lot of spiritual growth and mastery for some, right? So yeah, we went through all of the well, not everything, but we went through a lot of the astronomical variables on Saturn. And y'all, everything that I mentioned in this video is in this book, all right? This book is 500 pages. You can purchase it in the description below. It's Astrostetics. Let's get it, baby.
It's Astrostetics.